Hello, welcome to the program, everyone. We've got some breaking news out concerning Bud Light, concerning Anheuser-Busch. It seems that the heir from the family, well, he's not too happy about this. And he said neither would any of his relatives, his deceased relatives, they'd be actually rolling over in their graves when and if they were to have seen any of that Dylan Mulvaney footage. We're going to show you his footage talking about how his relatives would react coming up. Plus, we got to get to Mitch McConnell. Poor Mitch McConnell. I mean, this whole thing just made me really, really sad to see kind of what he has become. Sad to see what our society has become. He was just booed and heckled and everybody told him to go home, basically, to retire. It's not an easy thing to watch, regardless of how you feel about Mitch McConnell. And we got to talk about the Democrats now going after Donald Trump for something that, frankly, I mean, I think actually, if they were put to the test, one could go after them for. Because don't forget how Jimmy Carter, how Hillary Clinton, how pretty much everyone, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, everyone in the Democrat Party actually used misinformation to try and say that the election had been stolen by the Russians. I haven't forgotten that. Have you? Good to see you. Good to see you, everyone. Great to have you here. Portions of the show are brought to you by Legacy, pminvestments.com. You can get more information at 1-866-5890-560. And if any of you are watching here, I see a lot of you are because we are live today, watching on YouTube. I see so many familiar faces. Good to see you, Willie, Mike, Ricardo, or on Facebook. Then great. You see me in this little cabin. I'm up in northern Maine in this little tiny cabin on a lake. You may hear some tubing and some water skiing outside, so forgive the noise. I am here in this environment, and I just had to keep doing the show because this is an important time, everyone, and I'm committed. So please make sure you're committed. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. Really, really important. Just hit subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, thank you. I'm thrilled you're there. And, well, come check us out. You see this little cabin here in the lake woods that I am in today. Anyway, let's get straight to the news. We do have these distributors right now getting really upset, those that distribute Bud Light throughout the country, because you know what? They're losing money. They're losing a lot of money, and they don't want to put more orders in. They don't want to have to distribute this stuff if nobody's going to buy it. We saw earnings out of the company just come last week, and what did they prove? Well, they got a problem there, shall we say, in the United States of America, thanks to Bud Light. It's actually affecting the rest of the beers in the AB InBev lineup or portfolio. Anheuser-Busch, this is that company that was just a legendary company, started hundreds of years ago and was sold in 2008 for $52 billion to a Brazilian company. You know, it's a Belgian company. I mean, this is like a multinational conglomerate. That's how you need to understand what AB InBev has become today. And so the earnings are down. Distributors are upset. A big article actually in the New York Post talking about how upset they are because you know what? They see all the handwriting on the wall. They know that this money is not coming back. We used to talk about the $27 billion in market cap that had been lost thanks to the Bud Light debacle and Alyssa Heinerschneid and her fantastic marketing skills, thanks to a Harvard Business School. By the way, Harvard, you ought to do a, shall we say, an HBS case study on this one here with Bud Light, because it's just really remarkable. Now we're looking at roughly $40 billion in market cap that has been wiped out. The stock closing lower again today. Well, here is Billy Bush. So Billy Bush is not the Billy Bush that you're thinking of, not the one from Access Hollywood or one of those entertainment shows. This is the Billy Bush that is part of the Bush family that started Anheuser-Busch. And he said, you know, he's out actually pumping a book right now. He's got a whole book on his family called Family Reigns. And it's sort of a look at the dynasty, if you would, of that family and how they lost control of the company when they did sell it for $52 billion, again, back in 2008. Anyway, he went on TMZ to talk about all of that. And he was asked, hey, you know, what do you think your relatives would think about what was going on? This is pretty remarkable what he says, and I think probably very true.
You must have strong opinions about the
Dylan Mulvaney campaign.
Yeah, Dylan Mulvaney campaign.
I think my family, my ancestors would have rollen over in their grave They were very patriotic. They loved this country and what it stood for. They believed that transgender, gays, that sort of thing was all a very personal issue. They love this country because it is a free country and people are allowed to do what they want. But it was never meant to be on a beer can and never meant to be pushed in people's faces. So they would have they would have never marketed their brands that way. As you know, AB
was a great brand. AB InBev, though, came in, international company, Brazilian company. It was really known for its sort of private equity approach to things. You know, we were just talking with one of their top executives, Anson Fredericks, who is now actually over at Strive. You can go and watch that interview. We released an excerpt from it just yesterday. So Anson was one of their top executives, and he said, you know, this company changed drastically. So in the beginning, it was kind of like this private equity shop out of Brazil where they were really proud of what they were doing, and they really paid attention to shareholders, and they were trying to create equity for shareholders. And all of a sudden, it really started to change. Maybe in 2017, 2018, it kind of lost its way. Well, maybe it lost its way back when it was sold, right, to the Brazilians and the Belgians. Maybe that was when it became a little too big for its own good. Here's a continuation of that interview with Billy Bush saying, you know, that whole Dylan Mulvaney thing, really, that was the train wreck because it got away from understanding the core customer, the core consumer that drank Bud Light. Here we go.
The motivation behind it was clearly inclusiveness. What do you think of the reaction to to that Instagram post? Because the reaction was seismic.
Yeah, you know, I think people who drink beer, I think they're your common folk. I think they are the blue collar worker who goes out and works hard every single day. And the last thing they want pushed down their throat, you know, or to be drinking is a beer can with that kind of message on it. I just don't think that's what they're looking for. They want their beer to be truly American, truly patriotic, as it always has been, truly America's beer, which Bud Light was and probably isn't any longer.
Not any longer. No, I don't think that this is America's beer anymore. What do you guys think? Not happening, right? Anyway, it's a sad story in that, you know, there are shareholders, mom and pop shareholders that had money in this company and have just seen it wiped out. Let me give you an example. The company was worth $134.5 billion before this whole Dylan Mulvaney scandal. Now it's worth $97.75 billion. So call it 98. Let's be generous. That is a lot of money. It is a lot of money to have lost. Profits in the second quarter down 30%. It lost nearly $400 million just in the U.S. in terms of sales numbers because nobody's buying this stuff. And it is affecting other brands. I mean, they've gone from number one beer in the United States of America to just giving that away right over to Modelo. Now, some of you have said, oh, well, Modelo is actually owned by AB InBev as well. Well, they don't have the distribution rights to it in the United States of America. That would actually be Constellation Brands. So I know it's a lot of beers. It's a lot to keep track of. I guess the moral of the story is drink local, right? You know, patronize your local company. Good reason to kind of get back to our roots in that sense. I want to turn now to the election and the indictments one after another that keep coming forward. Now, Donald Trump's attorney says you can expect another indictment. So I guess we'd be up to number 4. It's kind of hard to keep track at this point. But I want to point out something. The biggest flaw in this idea that somehow they can go after him for January 6th, to me anyway, is that you're effectively saying that if you have a piece of information and you misuse it, meaning you push this information because you're trying to help yourself politically, well, then you're going to have big problems. And I'm like, hang on, because isn't this exactly what politicians do all the time? Isn't this their MO? In fact, think about Hillary Clinton, what she was spinning after she lost. Remember this?
You can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee. And you can have the election stolen from you.
Nah. You can have it stolen. Remember that. You can have it stolen, I guess, with the help of the Russians, as Jimmy Carter so articulated. Here he is, another doozy here, short time after the election, saying on stage in an interview with John McCutcheon that, in fact, the Russians stole the election, that this was not, Donald Trump was not a legitimate president. Here we go.
There's no doubt that the Russians did interfere in the election, and I think the interference, although not yet quantified, if fully investigated, would show that Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf.
So do you believe President Trump is an illegitimate president?
Based on what I just said, which I can't retract.
Funny. So, in other words, they were saying this stuff. They were saying this stuff first. I mean, I hate to be tit for tat, but that is the world in which we now live. And I'm just going to say this. It was the Democrats that started this. It was the Democrats that said, one, he didn't win, that the election was rigged by the Russians. And then this is alarming. I played this for you the other. I'm going to keep playing this because you got to keep hearing this. This is Hillary Clinton in August of 2020, trying to say that, you know what, if it looked like Trump was going to win again, well, then Biden should not give up under any circumstances whatsoever, that he had to cling, that he had to hold on. Don't listen to me. Here she is herself. Here we go. Speaking to her good friend who was one of her PR people who had a podcast.
You know, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
You get the message. Don't give an inch. He'll win eventually as long as we don't give in. You know, and not only was she not willing to give in, no matter what, and recommending that Joe Biden do that, she actually was saying we need to make sure we have all our own people on the ground. I just say, for what? Listen to this part.
So we've got to have a massive legal operation. I know the Biden campaign is working on that. We have to have poll workers, and I urge people who are able to be a poll worker. We have to have our own teams of people to counter the force of intimidation that the Republicans and Trump are going to put outside polling places.
So you see what I'm saying? I mean, you've got a little bit of a situation there in that she was unhappy she didn't win. She blamed the Russians with the whole help of the Democrat Party. In fact, the Republicans actually, I think this morning, they just released some 24 minutes. You can watch it if you want, if you have 24 minutes to devote to this, of just one after another Democrats saying over and over and over again that the election had been stolen and rigged by the Russians. So that was all out there. When it turned out, everything that they were alleging actually turned out in the way that they were alleging it to not be true. And now you come full circle and you say, okay, we're going to make sure that we're going to win no matter what ahead of 2020. And now that the wrong guy won, well, actually back in 2016, you're now going to say, okay, there's no chance he's going to win again, ever again in 2024. We're going to make sure that we do everything possible to prevent that. And we're just going to have lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. I just say, look, careful what you wish for, guys, because this could backfire spectacularly. This is our freedom of speech. And I don't like it any more than you do that politicians lie and that they misuse information. But this is kind of what they do. Two wrongs don't make a right. I'm not saying that it's ever right for them to lie and for them to knowingly misuse information. But it's a little tough to be able to then somehow go after one side and not the other. Am I right? Wow. I mean, meanwhile, you do have real issues going on, shall I say. You might be looking at a letter if you're watching this on camera. If you're not watching it on camera, you can join us over on YouTube or on Facebook where we are live. If you're watching there or listening on Apple Podcasts, I commend you for it. And I would love everybody who is watching on Facebook and on YouTube to join us over on the Apple Podcast, the full audio version of the show. Anyway, you see a letter that is sent to Devon Archer. It's from the then Vice President of the United States of America, that would be Joe Biden. And it reads, I apologize for not getting a chance to talk to you at the luncheon yesterday. I was having trouble getting away from hosting President Hugh. I hope I get a chance to see you again soon with Hunter. I hope you enjoyed the lunch. Thank you for coming. Sincerely, Joe Biden Jr. Happy you guys are together, he writes in handwriting. So that's a little bit of an issue in that Joe Biden sort of was pretending or telling everyone that he knew nothing about his son's business, nothing at all. Well, he knew enough to actually bother sending a letter to the guy who was his associate to say, hey, like, I'm so psyched that you guys are working together. And then it came forward, thanks to the testimony, and here's some of it right here, before the House Oversight Committee, that in fact, Joe Biden would call up in those nice little dinners that they would have with clients and say, hey, how you doing, son? That kind of thing. Apparently, there was no quote unquote direct sort of strategic involvement from Joe Biden, according to Devon Archer. But, that's not what you needed after all. What you needed was access. Let's not kid each other. These countries all around the world, what do you think they wanted? They wanted access, because the U.S. kind of bankrolls the rest of the world. And so in getting this access, they needed accessibility, right, to the vice president, especially in the case of Ukraine, since he was controlling the purse strings. It was all about access, as Devon Archer so articulated to Tucker Carlson in a recent interview. Listen to this.
Did he have a sophisticated understanding of regulation, do you think?
I think that he led a team that had a sophisticated...
Okay, because I lived in Washington a long time, around a lot of regulation. Also a very complex area.
Absolutely. I think you got to be an expert in knowing the guy, and he was the guy that was the expert in knowing the guy.
He was an expert in knowing the guy.
Right.
And who was the guy he knew?
Well, he knew a lot of people, but obviously there was some familiar, his brother, his father, some of his father's siblings. So he knew a lot of people. And obviously I know you're pointing to, the father being the key relationship.
In other words, he knew a guy. He knew a guy who knew a guy. Actually, no, he knew the guy. He knew the guy who was controlling the purse strings. And this is the concern, right? Because Hunter Biden gets his plum gig, $83,000, a month. $83,000 a month, and he's on the board of Burisma, an energy company, a natural gas company in Ukraine. He doesn't really know anything about the industry. He has a pretty checkered past, right, with the drug use, etc. And he and his associate, that would be Devon Archer that you just saw, they both get $83,000 a month gigs. Pretty sweet. And so why? Well, this was presumably for some kind of access. The question then becomes, did Joe Biden ever act on the access? And that is what the House Oversight Committee is trying to figure out. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. You get the tax stuff galore, which is just mind-blowing. The idea that you set up 20 different LLCs shortly after Joe Biden becomes vice president of the United States. That's problematic in and of itself, with the money going to various family members. That's obviously of concern. You had 170 suspicious activity reports that were reported to the Treasury Department by the banks that were managing all of this. Listen, this is weird stuff within the tax issue itself, but also within the issue of accessibility. That's problematic. And hey, Trump called it back in 2020.
It's an open discussion, please.
Now, it's a fact.
Well, you have raised an issue. Let the vice president answer.
Discredited.
Did Burisma pay him $183,000 a month with no experience in energy?
Mr. President,
my son did nothing wrong at Burisma.
I think he did.
Mr. President, let him answer.
He doesn't want to let me answer because he knows I have the truth. His position has been totally, thoroughly discredited.
By who? The media.
Actually, it turns out it's actually been rather credited now. Yes, he was making $83,000 a month. And whether the then aspirational president was willing to admit that or not, well, again, lying? Is this misinformation? Can someone go after him for that? This is what politicians do. Unfortunately, it is the world in which we live. There are a lot of unanswered questions here, and I think that there is some onus here on both parties to get to the bottom of it, if nothing else, than to sort of make everybody else in America feel better, because we should not be for sale. We are not a banana republic. We should be above this. And so there's a lot of pressure still on Republicans to follow through, Mitch McConnell being one of them. Everybody's like, hey, wait a second, Mitch, what's going on? Why isn't this happening? Mitch McConnell is suffering, in my estimation, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a family member, so I don't know. I just see what I see on camera. He's suffering from some other challenges. I would guess physical challenges. Don't forget the other day what happened when he kind of zoned out. Some people worried that it might have been even kind of a mini stroke. We hope not, but clearly he's challenged. Well, this is just horrendous to see. I'm sorry to even have to show it to you, because I don't think this reflects well on anyone. I get that a lot of people don't want Mitch McConnell in the seat right now. I get a lot of people want to see more activity from the House Oversight Committee, and they'd like to see impeachment proceedings begin there with Joe Biden. That would, take a fair amount of effort and leadership from the Republican Party. But still, it's pretty uncalled for what actually happened. Watch this. Little painful. Full disclosure. Let's talk about it there on the other side. Oh, can't find the file. What do you know? Well, we will look for it later. I can describe it to you. It is about a minute of just yelling at Mitch McConnell, yelling at him to retire. They're chanting, retire, 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 retire. And they're drowning him out. I mean, why anybody wants to go into politics is beyond me. I guess you better be making something on the side, right? For goodness sakes. What a thankless business. So Mitch McConnell's getting yelled at really spectacularly. It is awful. And I'm just going to say this. You know what? We've come to the point in society where clearly nobody has any manners. Nobody has any decorum whatsoever. For goodness sakes, you got Lizzo out there shaking her you-know-what as she's playing a many hundred-year-old flute that was once owned by James Madison. I mean, this is where we are, folks.
Bitch, I just twerked and played James Madison Christmas Eve from the 1800s.
In other words, there's no decorum. There's no decorum in the entertainment space. There's no decorum in the political space. There's no decorum in the business space. Like, what is happening to society? We are deteriorating, and we are deteriorating very quickly, to the point where politicians on one side of the aisle, because by the way, you can only get away with this stuff on one side of the aisle. Politicians on one side of the aisle actually had the audacity to say 2 months before the election that no matter what, Joe Biden should never concede even if he lost? Remember.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances, because I think this is going to drag out. And eventually, I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the Russians did interfere in the election. And I think
they're all in cahoots together on this. They've got their talking points, and they're going to keep jamming them down our throat. The danger becomes, at what point does society really start to suffer? Because we're not allowed certain freedoms, including our freedom of speech. I just would say this. I think society starts to push back, which is exactly what you saw in the case of Bud Light. That is why that company has lost nearly $40 billion in market cap since the whole Dylan Mulvaney scandal unfolded, right? There's a theme here, and people can only be pushed so far. On top of it, they're dealing with a really lousy economy. And I say lousy because this is what you never want. You don't want stagflation, which is the direction I believe that we're heading in. You got a little inflation going on. You got a soft economy going on. What does that mean? It means stagflation. And guess what? Ironically, we haven't had that since Jimmy Carter back in the 1970s. I mean, we're going straight. This is like Jimmy Carter 2.0. And so from an economic perspective, people are hurting. They don't like it. You look at what's going on with mortgage rates right now. We are now at some 23-year high, up nearly 8. We're at nearly 8%. It's 7% and change. And this is all direct reflection of what's going on with treasuries right now, because the 10-year yield is up over 4%. I believe it closed about 4.09%. I mean, you get 10-year yields that high. What does it do? It makes everything else go up. It makes the cost of capital go higher, because that's how interest rates are set, effectively off the 10-year yield, right? So you're going to pay more for the mortgage, which means, guess what? You can't afford as much house. And given that most Americans have their net worth tied up in their housing, that's going to make them feel really lousy, whether it's just on paper or whether, in fact, they have to sell their home. They're not going to be able to sell it for as much money. All these things going on with the economy right now. It's one reason why I do encourage diversification. And if gold or silver is something that you're looking at in terms of diversification, in terms of perhaps an inflation hedge, you can give my friends over at Legacy PM Investments a call. First sponsor on this show. Remember, the very, very first. So just terrific group of people. You're welcome to use my name, of course. 1-866-589-0560. You can buy or sell gold or silver right there online with them. Again, legacypminvestments.com. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Here I am from my little cabin here, cabin in the woods up in northern Maine. I don't think my back shot is as nice as Tucker's Maine cabin, but you know, give me a couple days. We'll see what we can do. Anyway, again, love having you all here. Thank you for being here. Great to see you. And we'll continue our conversation again tomorrow.